I think it's appropriate that I'm recording this "What's the Deal with Dividing by Zero" video. I think it's appropriate that I'm recording it in New Mexico, and I just stood up to think about this video, and there was a giant crack of thunder. Generally we sort of, if you haven't seen math jokes on the internet before, maybe it's because you're less of a nerd than I am, but 1 divided by 0 is always, surrounded by pictures of like black holes and crazy bad things happening. And the reality is 1 divided by 0, or really any number divided by 0, is bad news. But we need to have a little bit better of an understanding about what it means and what it does. Strictly speaking, any number divided by 0 is undefined. In other words, there is no number that is equal to some number divided by 0, and I can give you a quick reason for that. Let's say somebody thought that 3 divided by 0 was equal to something. Let's say, I really think 3 divided by 0 is equal to n, right? If you try to solve this, you could, like multiply both sides of the equation by 0, and this effectively means 3 equals some number times 0. And so now I challenge you to sort of think, like, what number could you multiply with 0 to get 3? And you can think about it for as long as you want. There are no such numbers. And in fact, this even says no right here. The idea is division by 0 is not allowed. But for our class, it's going to be important for us to understand what happens when a limit approaches 1 over 0. Like, what does it mean when you get closer and closer and closer to 1 over 0? And there are a few ways that we can think about that. One of them, well, there goes the thunder again. One of them that I want us to think about is to be honest, I kind of want to go back to like a grade school understanding of fractions. Like, I feel like when you first learned fractions, whatever grade it was in, your teacher probably came up and they wrote on the board the fraction 1/8. And they said, what does 1/8 mean? 1/8 means that there is 1 pizza and I'm sharing it among 8 people, and everybody's eyes glow because you're in grade school and it's pizza, right? Then they wrote another fraction on the board and they said 1 over 4. Like, well, what does this mean? Well, this means there's 1 pizza and it's being shared by 4 people now, so everybody gets a little bit wider eyed because that means you're getting an even bigger piece of pizza, right? Then the teacher writes 1 over 2. You're like, oh man, I get a half a pizza. Like, this is making sense to you, right? Then the teacher writes 1 over 1, and they're like, whoa, that means I have 1 pizza and I have like 1 person that I'm sharing. Like, wow, that's just me. I get a whole pizza. If I continued with this though, like, what if I wrote 1 over a half? And this gets weird because there's no such thing as a half person, but you could sort of think this means I'm going to give 1 person 1 pizza to each half of a person, which we all know means that everybody gets like 2 pizzas. And at that point you're still kind of excited. But then it gets absurd. Your teacher starts going like, what about 1 over 1/4? And you're like, I don't even want to think about eating 4 pizzas. Like, that's kind of messed up. If I keep going, what if I would do 1 over 1/10? That means there's 1 pizza for every 1/10 of you, which means you're walking out of here with 10 pizzas, right? As I continue this process, when I do 1 over 100, 1 over 1,000, right? 1 over 1/10,000. Like, I'm giving 1 pizza to each 10,000. Like, this is 10,000 pizzas for you. What I want you to see is, as I plug in numbers to the denominator that get smaller and smaller and smaller, as I get closer and closer and closer to 1 over 0, as I approach 1 over 0, this thing seems to approach infinity. Now please understand, that doesn't mean that 1 over 0 is infinity. But it means that we kind of have to think about, when you're doing a limit that's approaching 1 over 0, you're getting a huge, huge number. Another way that you can think about this is I want you to think about the graph of y equals 1 over x. And you guys have memorized this graph before. I mean, you've seen that this graph looks like this. But I wonder if you've ever really thought about what it means. Think about what it means graphically, right? If I were to ask you, what is the limit as x approaches 0, and let's just say 0 from the right. There's another really huge thunder. Apparently I need to finish this video fast. As I approach 0 from the left, what's happening to the values of this function? The values of this function are getting absurdly high. When I take the limit as x approaches 0, from the right, of 1 over x, this limit is tending towards infinity. I'm not going to write equals infinity because we can't actually say that, but I can say this limit is tending towards positive infinity. You can see that these values are getting larger and larger and larger. So, and I'm basically at the end of this video. I hope that what you've seen is one, division by 0 is not allowed. I mean, we sort of talked about that way back at the beginning, right? If you try and allow for division by 0, you end up in a position where you've got some number is equal to another number times 0, and that's not okay. right? On the other hand, we understand that when you have something that's approaching 1 over 0, that thing is becoming incredibly large. And that's valuable for us to know as we go into the next part of our lessons.